So Nick, thank you for taking some time out to have a chat with us. We're obviously all about helping and supporting small businesses. In simple terms, how can small businesses ensure that they are getting the correct consent for marketing from their customers or from prospects?
So, thanks. I think it's a really interesting area to start discussing GDPR, because I think for a lot of small businesses with customers, email lists, marketing, mail shots, news updates, this is quite a sort of a relevant topic which affects everybody. And one of the main changes that GDPR introduced was to make the standard for obtaining consent to speculatively email people a bit higher. So instead of these sort of soft opt-in type arrangements that people had, you kind of could assume in the absence of complaints that people were okay to receive emails. Now actually what you need to do is to make sure you've got explicit consent. So what does that mean? And there's quite a lot of guidance and good practice. So for example, the ICO, the Information Commissioner Office from the United Kingdom, has some quite helpful guidance for it. But essentially the practical effect is when you're sending marketing messages to prospects and customers, that you need to get them to positively click a box to say they want to receive them. You shouldn't be sending them unless people have done that. So it's a bit stricter, but that's in practice what you have to do. And I think all of us now who do any sort of online activity and shopping are quite used to seeing those sorts of specifically opting in. Doesn't seem to say, from my perspective, that we've actually received less email. There was a lot of flurry at the time around re-opting in, and to continue receiving these messages, you must do this. In practice, I think I've got more, if not the same amount of marketing emails, whether I wanted them or not. But that's what the rules are.
Okay, I would agree with that. So what about legitimate interest then? So isn't that an easy way that people can not bother about getting consent, but just say, well, I have a legitimate interest and that's why I've sent you this email?
Well, okay, that's it depends really what you're targeting. So if you have a publicly available contact at a business, at a company, and it just happens to be the name of the chief executive or whoever it is that you're targeting, then I think there is a sort of argument that you could legitimately send emails because it's a sort of a corporate communication to a publicly known officer of the company. That's much more difficult where you have sort of small retail or individual consumers, where you're much more into the realms of sort of privacy law and privacy protection and what people would legitimately expect to be receiving. I think if you're the chief executive of a business and you've got a website and you have a sort of public profile, then those arguments are possible. But in any case, if you're sending emails and you're relying on legitimate interest, I would in any case always give people the option to opt out, because otherwise you risk running complaints, and it's complaints to the Information Commissioner which are what really start to get you into trouble. Is
it fair that small businesses have to, comply with GDPR in the same way that those massive companies do?
Well, it may or may not be fair, but the fact is the rules are the same. I mean, in the same way though that the penalties are proportional to your business. So obviously you're never going to be hit by the same sort of scale of financial penalties as Google and Facebook are, but it still could be painful. The guidance has been much more also that there's a lot more leniency going to be taken for smaller businesses. As long as you can show that you've tried to do the right thing, then you're unlikely to come under any serious difficulty, I'd say. Whereas if you look at, say, we've just seen the first couple of big public breaches of GDPR. So GDPR came in May 2018, so it takes a bit of time for GDPR breaches to go through the full sort of process. We've seen the British Airways massive fine for allowing millions of customers' financial and personal details to be breached and stolen by hackers. That's what GDPR is really targeted at. It's meant that the regulators of personal data and data security have actually now got some meaningful sanctions against these very large companies who've got millions and millions of customer data. Now, I think for 99% of businesses, especially small businesses, that's just simply never going to be the case. You're never going to be in the lucky position of having millions and millions of customer data and valuable information which needs to be secured. So it's just not relevant for most companies.
You mentioned obviously fines, and the number of a number of companies have been fined in the last 12 months. I think the ICO famously said that they weren't going to look at GDPR as a big bang approach, but more as something that companies will evolve over time. Do you think we're likely to therefore see more fines over the next 12 months than we have done since it was implemented last year?
Well, that's something I'm very sure we will see, because we've only had a couple really so far, and it's because it takes a bit of time to go through the system. And I know of several dozens of complaints which are supposed to be going through the pipeline, but that process has not been gone through yet. And there's various internal processes with the ICO, with investigation. They write to the company writes back. This stuff takes months and months. So in the next 12 months, we will see, or start to see, more of the outcomes of complaints and breaches which have happened in the last 12 months.
So if I'm a small business, or for small businesses in the UK, they may have obviously outsourced to a number of suppliers who are not in the UK. So what do they need to be aware of specifically in those instances?
So as I said, I think I said before, the GDPR bites on data, personal data relating to residents of the EU. Okay, so just because you're in the UK or another part of the EU and you decide to use a supplier somewhere else, it doesn't matter. You're still the data controller in GDPR speak. You're still responsible, and you're actually are specifically responsible for how your supplier handles your data. So, I mean, for some things it might not matter too much. But for example, I think a lot of small companies would outsource their finance, payroll, that sort of thing. You need to make sure you've got a reputable supplier, that they themselves have got security measures in place no less strong than the ones that you would use yourself in terms of your own staff, payroll, financial information. So there's a certain amount of care needs to be taken when you're letting suppliers handle your own data, because a breach by the supplier effectively is a breach by you if you've not done a good enough job to check that they've got the right.
So small businesses should be checking that their suppliers are also GDPR compliant.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, good suppliers in this area are all very well aware of these rules, and they should have got it all set up, but you need to be asking the questions.
But they should have a document really that they can provide the small business that actually gives the small business that
If they haven't,
comfort.
then you've got to be asking why you're choosing them as a supplier. All the reputable ones will have that now.